Every morning at 5:47 a.m., Daniel Thompson arrived at the same law firm. The same building, the same gray uniform, the same mop in his hands. He was the janitor. He had been the janitor for 30 years. The lawyers walked past him every morning. Most never looked up, most never said a word, except one. The senior partner of the firm, a man worth $40 million, would slow his steps every single morning, look left, look right, and then quietly say two words. "Good morning, sir." Not Daniel, not "Hey, sir." For 30 years, nobody understood why. Daniel Thompson was 62 years old. He lived alone in a small apartment on the east side of the city. His apartment had three things on the wall: a photograph of his late wife, Margaret, a child's drawing, slightly faded, that said, "Daddy, you are my hero," and a small piece of paper, pinned carefully above his desk. It said simply, "They will understand, one day." He had two sons. Richard, the eldest, was a corporate attorney. Michael, the younger, ran a chain of restaurants. Both were successful. Both were ashamed of their father. They had not visited his apartment in 4 years, not because they were busy, but because a janitor father was not the story they wanted to tell their friends. At family gatherings, they introduced him as retired, never as what he actually was. Daniel never corrected them. He would just smile quietly and pass the bread. It was Richard's 42nd birthday dinner. The restaurant was expensive: crystal glasses, imported wine, a table of 20 successful people in expensive suits. Daniel came in his best shirt. It was ironed carefully, but it was old. Halfway through dinner, Richard raised his glass for a toast. He spoke about hard work, about building something from nothing, about making the family proud. Then he looked at his father, and in front of everyone at that table he said, "Dad, honestly, you spent your whole life cleaning other people's floors. You never built anything. You never achieved anything. I say this with love, but you have achieved nothing." The table went silent. Daniel put down his fork. He looked at his son. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He did not cry. He simply folded his napkin, placed it on the table, stood up quietly, and said, "Happy birthday, son." He walked out alone. In the parking lot, he sat in his old car for a moment. Then he took out his phone, dialed a number. The voice on the other end answered immediately. Daniel spoke 4 words. "It's time, phase 3. He hung up, started the car, and drove home. Phase 3. What was phase 3? 3 weeks later, Daniel collapsed at work. The senior partner himself rode with him in the ambulance. He held Daniel's hand the entire way. He did not let go once. When Richard and Michael arrived at the hospital, they were relieved. Not about their father, about the timing. Their father was getting old. The apartment, though modest, was in a building that had recently been acquired by a developer. There might be compensation. There might be assets they did not know about. A family lawyer arrived quietly with a single document: power of attorney. If Daniel signed, they would have full legal control of all his financial affairs. Just in case, just for safety, just for family. Daniel read the document slowly, every line, every clause. Then he looked at his sons, and he signed it, without a single word of argument. Richard and Michael exchanged a look in the hospital corridor, relieved smiles, a quiet celebration in hushed voices. The nurse came back into Daniel's room to check his vitals. She glanced at the document on the bedside table. She had worked in that hospital for 20 years. She had seen families like this before. She asked softly, "Sir, are you okay? You just signed away everything." Daniel looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he smiled the way a man smiles when he knows something no one else in the room knows. He said, "No, I signed away nothing." On the second day in the hospital, a woman arrived. She was 34 years old. She had driven 11 hours. She had not slept. Her name was Emily, Daniel's daughter, his youngest. 10 years ago, when Emily had stood by her father's side during a bitter family dispute, Richard and Michael had cut her off completely. They had called her disloyal. They had called her foolish. They had told her she was no longer family. Emily had not been invited to birthdays or dinners, or Christmas, for 10 years. She walked into Daniel's hospital room carrying two things: a homemade sandwich wrapped carefully in brown paper, and a hug that lasted a long time. Daniel held his daughter, and for the first time in the entire story he cried. Not from pain, not from illness. From the quiet knowledge that, after 30 years of watching, he finally had his answer. He always said money would reveal everyone. It had. Daniel was discharged 4 days later. His sons had arranged a family meeting. A lawyer was present. The mood was formal, expectant. Richard sat at the head of the table. He believed this was finally the moment everything would transfer to him. The lawyer opened his briefcase. He removed a document. But it was not the power of attorney that Richard and Michael had signed. The lawyer placed a different document on the table. A company registry. He began to read. Silent Foundations, LLC. Real Estate Investment and Development Company. Registered October 1994. Richard frowned. The lawyer continued. Current portfolio, 47 commercial and residential properties across 6 states. Current net worth, $51 million. The room went completely silent. Michael's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Richard's face drained of all color. The lawyer looked up. The power of attorney document signed by Mr. Thompson was for a holding company with 0 assets. It was created specifically for this meeting. Mr. Thompson's actual estate is protected under a separate legal structure established 3 decades ago. He closed the folder. Mr. Thompson began in 1994 with a single condemned building purchased for $3,000. Over 30 years, he quietly built what you see here. During this period, 80% of all income was donated anonymously to widows, orphans, and children's foundations across the country. He remained as a janitor, not because he had nothing, but because he wanted to know who would love him when they believed he had nothing. 30 years. He waited 30 years for that answer. Now he had it. Richard and Michael received nothing, not because Daniel was cruel, but because he had already given them everything a father could give: his time, his presence, his patience, his quiet dignity at every table where they had humiliated him. Emily received everything, and among the anonymous donations the lawyer listed was a children's home on the east side of the city. One of its youngest residents, a boy who had been abandoned at birth, had recently been given a name by the staff. They called him Daniel. Some men spend their whole lives trying to prove their worth to people who have already decided they have none. Daniel Thompson never tried to prove anything. He simply built in silence, gave in silence, and waited in silence for the truth to speak for itself. Because the quietest people in the room are sometimes carrying the heaviest crowns.